Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to this afternoon session for the certificate program on environmental sustainability. As usual, we will be covering a very important area related to your coursework. And we have been, over time, very fortunate to have a number of highly experienced academicians among us. And today will be no different. In fact, we have a very accomplished academician in Dr. Krishnakumar with us. And so we'll be taking you through the area of green bonds and catastrophe bonds. Over time, we have been fortunate that academicians from across the world have collaborated a great deal in making our programs a success. And earlier we had academicians from Texas University, a national professor from India, then from the Commonwealth of Learning, ex-Commonwealth of Learning employees, and a number of other dignitaries who have graced this forum. And today, we in fact are very fortunate to have a session from Dr. Krishnakumar. In fact, I was fortunate that during my student days, Dr. Krishnakumar was our senior. And we used to learn a lot of very nice things from Dr. Krishnakumar through our discussions and various other interactions. And today, I'm sure there will be a lot of fresh nuances that Dr. Krishnakumar will be laying on the table. And as we and as myself and all our colleagues know, Dr. Krishnakumar is a wonderful gentleman and has worked a lot for making economics in its simplest form popular among the students and teachers of the country. And it is indeed my pleasure and privilege, first and foremost, to welcome Dr. Krishnakumar to this session. Thank you for raising this occasion, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajesh, and thank you so much, members there in the Indira Gandhi National
Yeah,
Open University.
and today on the forum, we also have our Assistant Regional Director, Dr. Pramila O. From IGNO Regional Center, Vadagara, Dr. Jalajakumari VT, Assistant Regional Director from IGNO Regional Center, Cochin, has also joined us on this session. And I also thank all the students from across the globe who are part of this particular program, that is certificate program in environmental sustainability, which is run on the SWAYAM platform, and also the students of MA Economics and other disciplines of IGNO who have also joined this session. And I urge you all to be active participants in this program by putting your comments and questions, etc., on the chat box. And towards the end of the program, we will take them one by one. And first and foremost, let me request in fact, I would like to welcome all persons from across the globe who have joined this session. And I request our Assistant Regional Director, Dr. Pramila O, to in fact introduce our guest of honor to the wider audience. Over to you, ma'am. I think you are muted, ma'am. Kindly unmute.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. Respected Senior Regional Director of IGNO, Regional Center Vadagara, Dr. M. Rajesh, our guest, Dr. S. Krishnakumar, Associate Professor, and all other participants. Very good afternoon. Today we are honored by the presence of an eminent speaker, Dr. S. Krishnakumar, Associate Professor of Sri Venkateswara College, Delhi University. The topic of today's speech is Financing Ecological Concerns in the Developing World, the New World of Green Bonds and Catastrophe Bonds. About Dr. Krishnakumar, Sir completed his MA, MPhil, PhD in Economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. As already mentioned, Krishnakumar Sir is working as Associate Professor at Sri Venkateswara College, New Delhi, in Delhi University. Sir's area of specialization are in research area, global liquidity, international monetary system, keenness, etc. And his teaching area of specialization are macroeconomics, international economics, and economic history. Sir's administrative roles and responsibilities are teacher in charge, Department of Economics, Sri Venkateswara College, coordinator social sciences, and member academic planning committee and member attendance screening committee. The courses he taught are intermediate macroeconomics and international economics for BA honors and principles of macroeconomics for BA program. His recent publications are many and some of them are from ultramelon mobility of capital to capital controls. And the second one is mega regionals in the world trading system, the end of the road for World Trade Organization. And the third one is United States and its challenges to multilateralism in the global economy and developing world and the WTO ministerial activeness is these are the some of his publications and the research projects conducted by Dr. Krishnakumar are mapping the unskilled labor in the National Capital Region, Delhi University Innovation Projects, Dr. Naditya Narayanaswamy, Dr. Shailaja S. N. Thakur, and Dr. Jasim. This is the project works conducted by Dr. Krishma. And sir, with great pleasure and enthusiasm, we welcome you, sir, to this session. Thank you, sir, and over to RD, RC Vadagara.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that very brief but very interesting introduction to Dr. Krishnakumar. And as personally, I know that Sir is not only covering the areas that you just mentioned, but he has a deep and abiding interest in a wide range of other areas also, including international relations, environment, and many other areas which are of relevance to the present day. So we are indeed very fortunate to have a very eminent academician with us, and definitely this video that we are preparing today will be a great addition to the repository that we already have, and definitely it will form part of the course also. And therefore, it is indeed a pleasure and a privilege once again to have Krishna Kumar sir with us. May I also welcome Dr. Prasida Unnikrishnan, Assistant Regional Director, IGNO Regional Center Cochin, who has just now joined us. And I am sure Dr. Sindhu P. Nair, Head of Evaluation Division, Regional Evaluation Center, Cochin, will also be joining us shortly. So, in fact, Madam is already there. So, Madam Sindhu, Dr. Sindhu, who is the head of Regional Evaluation Center for South Zone, Madam has also joined this session. So, we are sure to have a very interesting session with lots of discussion. And without much ado, let me now welcome Dr. Krishna Kumar to take the floor from us and deliver his lecture. Over to you, sir.
Much, Dr. Rajesh, for those kind words of introduction, and thank you, Dr. Pramila. So I think the screen will be shared from there. Dr.
Yeah, I'll share the screen from here. No problem. Just a second. Is it visible, sir?
Yes, it is visible. Maybe we can put it on full. Actually, it's visible like this. Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Can we go? Yeah. So in today's interaction or lecture with the students who are pursuing this particular SWAM course, uh, we would be discussing issues relating to green bonds and catastrophe bonds. But most importantly, we would be trying to discuss as how green bonds can actually be utilized as a method of financing climate mitigation or climate mitigation related issues or climate adaptation related issues in the developing countries. Or, in other words, what we will try to look at is also as to whether uh, this could be the only option or whether there are other options also which we should be exploring with respect to the developing countries. Because, like how all of you would know, only 2 days before there was a conference happening at Paris with respect to thinking in terms about what's the fine print of financing climate change when it comes to particularly small island and developing states. And small island developing states have been at the receiving end of ecological disaster which was not of their making. So, given that there is an asymmetry as to who has contributed to the stock of greenhouse gas emissions and who are at the receiving end, the financing of the same also has to assure some sort of equity and some sort of justice. But nonetheless, let's first go through what was in fact happening to the world, particularly happening to the world with respect to what are the landmark events which happened in the course of the last 20, 30 years with respect to this issue of climate change. Climate change has been an engagement of scholars worldwide and policy makers worldwide even far before. It's not that climate change and its discussions assumed significance only in the recent past. It was an important concern far before, in the sense that it was a concern which slowly started showing up in the course of 1970s. There was a Club of Rome report on the limits to growth. And then there was this Brundtland Commission report which came up, which gave the definition of sustainable development as the development of the present without foregoing the prospects of the future generations to continue to sustain livelihood, so sustain development. So all of those particular phases through which we went through, they were not considered to be very big events of policy intervention of climate, policy interventions relating to climate. Climate change or climate became a serious concern, or possibly the most important intervention which happened at the international policy levels was when we went ahead with the Montreal Protocol, and the Montreal Protocol, which resulted in the large scale reduction of the production of chlorofluorocarbons, which are supposed to be playing a very important role in the depletion of the ozone layer. So, that is the first landmark international environment policy coordination which happens in the modern period, that is in the period say post 80s, post 90s. And then there is there is a process which is set in motion, that you have the levels of greenhouse gases being continually on the increase, and there's something serious which is being confronted by the world as a result of this increase in greenhouse gases, that one would have to try to discuss these issues. And for annual discussions relating to it, there was this conference of parties which has started in 1995. And the most important intervention actually happens in the course of the Kyoto Protocol, which basically decided that the advanced countries of the world should try to limit the emissions to at least less than 5% of their 1990 levels. Remember that Kyoto Protocol was also not legally binding, but nonetheless Kyoto Protocol was actually putting forward a suggestion that at least the developed countries of the world should actually be trying to reduce their emissions levels to 5% below their 1990 levels. Because the GHG gases at that time, remember, the developing countries were not brought to the table, and in fact, there were lots of opinion differences about this. That the developing countries have also been contributing to it, etc. But nonetheless, the developing countries were not required of doing some such sort of some say it was not required of them to go ahead with reductions, because given their levels of development, remember it is 1990, 1997 and 1990 levels, say we are trying to compare it, we are trying to think in terms of whether we can try to address, because the growing levels of carbon dioxide parts per million has basically crossed levels of 400. It was continuing for 300 for a long period of time. For over centuries, it was continuing at levels far lower. And we were basically having it climbing up to more than 400 in the recent past. It has even crossed 400 and reached 410. So this was something very important to address, and this along with the other greenhouse gases, because remember that the toxicity associated with different greenhouse gases in their contribution to adding to the global warming is different. So whenever we speak about carbon dioxide emissions, we say carbon dioxide emissions equivalent, because we convert the potential contribution of different other gases by adjusting for it and give a amount of the emissions made by different countries. So it was in 9 at Copenhagen summit that it was decided that the gravity of the situation was taken into consideration, that if we are not, that is should not, that is there should be under no circumstance the temperature, the global average temperature of the world crossing 2 degrees, because it is going to be catastrophic for the sustenance of life in this planet. It is said that it should not be allowed to cross even 1.5 degrees. In fact, the developing countries' argument was that it should not be allowed to cross 1.5 degrees. So, towards that, targets based decision making, and this is very innovative in the sense that it requires the help of scientists, it requires the help of geographers, it requires the help of policymakers, it requires the help of number of social activists, civil society activists. But very importantly, compared to different other themes which are discussed internationally, the scientific component of this discussion becomes and makes it extremely different compared to different other policy interaction or other international policy coordination activities happening worldwide. There was the IPCC, there were the scientific committee reports of IPCC which used to keep warning about the issues. And the single most important, like I told you, Kyoto Protocol was very important because it tried to draw attention and said that it would be desirable that we reduce the emission levels below 5% compared to 1990. But now in 2015, there is yet another convention, the Paris Convention, which is in fact the single most important convention, which was trying to say that countries, also developing countries, should actually try to reduce the levels of emission and their nationally determined contribution. What as a country are you going to contribute towards the larger betterment of the climate condition in the world? Every country had to basically report it to this committee. In fact, it is unfortunate. It was an unfortunate situation that President Trump was in fact quitting United States. Actually, left this particular convention during this particular period, and United States later makes a joining back of this particular convention with Joe Biden, President Biden, because the real reason was that the reason was just this, that you could not actually meet, you could not go ahead with meeting these sorts of requirements. So always we hear about this 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees sort of a debate. I thought it would be better for us also to take cognizance as to what is the consequences of 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. In one of the IPCC reports, it says that if this particular level is crossed up to 1.5 degree to 2 degrees, if it is basically being crossed from our pre-industrial revolution era, then it would result in rising heat waves, it would result in rising sea levels, and it would have severe consequences for small island developing countries. And that's one important reason why the Prime Minister of Barbados had come up with this argument in year 2022. That is in the run-up. That is in the after the COP event which occurred in Egypt. She had come up with this particular argument that the developing countries, particularly the island developing countries, require justice, because for no mistake of theirs, the sea levels are rising. They are subjected to some tropical storms, and there is a large amount of infrastructure loss to which they go through, and there's an immense amount of suffering which they go through. They have to be compensated for it. It's only natural justice that they have to be compensated for. About that a little bit later, we will come again. And then number three is this destruction of 90% of coral reefs, which forms part of the ecosystem, and the rising acidity of oceans would result in the fisheries sector getting affected significantly. Overall, there will be biodiversity at risk, and therefore it was it was agreed upon widely that we should actually have a mechanism by means of which we try to see to it that this sort of climate change and its associated problems, there should be proper mitigation efforts. There should also be adaptation efforts. There should be methods by means of which we try to re-engineer things in such a manner that we are able to make the planet a better place to live. But necessarily and understandably, it requires huge amount of investments, it requires huge amount of finance. And when it comes to this question of finance and requirement, it should also important to notice as to who has been contributing. So in this graph, you can basically see the GHG emissions in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. We are using the word carbon dioxide equivalent precisely because there are other greenhouse gases like methane, sulfur dioxide, also this CFCs and PFCs, etc. They have got different other levels of implication on the global warming. But remember that the parts per million wise carbon dioxide presence is huge. The presence of others are less, but nonetheless, when we say we don't term it in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent, and you can see from this that the emitters, the top GHG emitters since 1850, if you look from 1850, the top GHG emitters, as the slide shows you, you can see it is United States, almost near 600,000 uh, metric tons of carbon dioxide emission. European Union, it's almost like 480, that is crossing almost 500,000. And then you basically have China, which is almost like 300,000 plus. So 300,000 metric tons plus. So the others are, though of course, they are lower in amount with respect to the stock of emissions done by the country since 1850. But if you take of course, it is said that as the development process picked up, the developed countries, particularly Europe as well as United States, has been responsible for the large stock of greenhouse emissions which has happened since 1850. But as against that is the chart which you find on the right hand side, and we can find that that particular chart actually tries to show you that every year, say year 2018, I'm taking this data from Climate Watch, 2018, the country which contributes most is China. It's contributing more than 13,000 metric tons. And again, you have US, which is contributing more than 5,000, between 5,000 and 10,000. You have European Union. So you have all of the other countries. European Union without UK is contributing a little bit less than India, Russia. These are the major emitters in 2018. But in 2018, we find that if you take the emissions done in the year 2018, definitely China's emissions are far higher compared to United States. But if you take the stock of emissions, also we find that China's US and European Union is far ahead compared to China. But it is also a fact that ever since 1990, some of the emerging and developing economies have been growing, and their contributions to the flow of emissions which is occurring has now become reaching such levels that unless the developing countries are also able to pitch in, possibly this question of addressing climate change would always remain a non sequitur. It would not start to begin with. And here you can see at another chart, that is the next chart, the chart on carbon dioxide emissions, metric tons per capita. So here also you can find that from the period from 1990 to 2019, uh, despite there being some marginal reductions with respect to the carbon dioxide emissions, this is the World Bank, World Resource Institute data, which is reported in the World Bank. We find that US, the per capita emissions of carbon dioxide in US continues to be at high levels compared to different other countries. But you can see that China, that is sometimes we say that the emissions is happening, but the number of people who are living in the country is also high. But you can see that the Chinese graph, it is almost more than 7. And you have high income countries. The high income countries, their graph is in fact almost like 9. That is the level which I'm saying is the last point. I'm saying 9. Then you can also see that the other countries, that is you can find that with respect to China, you can observe one thing, that compared to the UMC, what is being denoted as UMC is upper middle income countries. Compared to the upper middle income countries, also the per capita carbon dioxide emissions of China is higher. Remember that China is not an upper, yeah, even compared to the upper middle income countries, you have a higher emissions occurring for China. And the levels of emissions, of course, with respect to India, is far lower compared to that of the compared to that of the other countries. You can also see the same stuff with respect to sub-Saharan African region, or the highly, that is the countries which are always at the receiving end. The highly indebted countries, HIPC initiative countries, are also shown there. You can see that. So compared to the world emissions also, in fact, it should be noticed that the India's emissions is not large compared to the emissions of the world, per capita emissions of the world. But compared to the per capita emissions of compared to the per capita emissions, of course, of the world, as well as of course of the upper middle income countries, the emissions of China is higher. So the matter of fact thing is that in the contemporary world, when growth is picking up momentum in certain regions and it is sure to pick up in different other regions, it is better possibility to basically have the adaptation of climate friendly technologies, or technologies which would actually tend to reduce the carbon footprint, or basically have low carbon intensity. Such sort of technologies have to be utilized. Otherwise, once some of these countries catch up, possibly the issue might become great. And why I'm showing this HIPC countries is also because of the fact that these are the countries, one, these are countries with extremely low levels of income. Many of them are having extremely low levels of per capita income, and they are also facing severe issues relating to debt, and at the same time, they are facing severe issues relating to environmental crisis, and at the same time, they are also at the receiving end when interest rates worldwide go up. So they would be having no funds left with them to prioritize. For example, when it comes to a developing country, it can say that it would like to contribute so much to the reductions in carbon dioxide emissions. But if it is not able to, if it is not able to, because of certain other circumstances, because of the environmental crisis itself which they are going through, because of the rise in sea levels, or because of certain disturbances like how it had happened in recent Pakistan. For example, there was inundation of floods in which almost one third of the population was subject to. If due to such sort of circumstances they cannot, there is a necessity of finance. And there is a necessity of finance from international financial institutions. There is a necessity of finance from different multilateral development organizations. So, like I have told you, in Egypt, after the conference, we basically had this initiative which was undertaken simultaneously with the conference. There was this initiative which was undertaken by the Prime Minister of Barbados, and this is basically called the Bridgetown Initiative. The Bridgetown Initiative essentially tries to say that, there should be a reopening of this old question with respect to, the share of ODA which was supposed to be transferred by the advanced countries for the betterment of the developing countries, which is pegged at 0.7% of the GDP. There's a huge deficit on that front, and that should actually be tapped as an important source by means of which we create environmental public goods. Apart from that, along with Professor Avinash Prasad, this particular team puts forward serious suggestions with respect to how, through enhanced provisions of special drawing rights, as well as through ability to basically circulate SDRs, the issues relating to climate change or climate mitigation could very well be addressed better. So, and in fact, in the recent conference which happened, say 2 days back in Paris, many of their suggestions were seriously taken into consideration, and they are basically being pursued. And when you basically look at this issue of climate change, most important thing with respect to mitigation of climate mitigation and change is to see to it that you essentially have access to technology. So now, whichever steps are being taken worldwide towards reducing this catastrophe with respect to climate change, has to take into consideration methods by means of which we would be able to transfer technology. to the developing countries. That is number one. And in fact, the Bridgetown initiative in that sense is a very good step in the right direction. It also draws attention to the fact that, see, if different set of developing countries are going to be caught in the trap of, say, debt servicing concerns, that is, they are not able to repay their debt, and number two, they are facing lower prices for the commodities which they are exporting, and number three, they are also facing higher interest rates. Possibly, they would actually not be able to partner in this process of climate change. So, and when you most of you would have got introduced to this issue of sustainable development goals, and these 17 sustainable development goals never ever says that, see, the goals with respect to environment are very important, but there are certain other goals. For example, poverty, access to health, and all the other goals are also there, equally important. So sometimes if we are not going to give a proper effort with respect to financing these sorts of steps, that is steps relating to the availability of health, availability of education, availability of food. So there are certain priorities. Of course, environment is also a serious priority. Number of those goals relate to environment, water, etc. But we should also remember that we cannot be actually playing one priority against another. In fact, the concerns of the developing countries are basically fundamental, and it's unfortunate that we have not been able to achieve many of those goals over these years. And every report after report also draws attention to the fact that the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, they are running short of resources. So even in the recent Trade and Development report, they essentially draw attention towards the fact that you require a large amount of financing of green ventures to be done, and when funds are found to be lacking, we find that there is this new development banks and multilateral development banks which are there, which are also playing a very big role nowadays in the changed financial landscape, because many of the developing countries to directly access funds, even when it comes to creation of environmental goods, might not be a feasible thing. So they would have to be handholded in it, or they would actually have to tap it through through some of these institutions, or they would have to access finance from the international market through some of these multilateral development banks. And as all of you would know, a very large chunk of the total loan, of course, continues to occur under climate finance from the World Bank. To the low and middle income countries basically get a large amount of their climate finance loans from the World Bank, but the amount is too less to meet the objectives. That's the only issue. And in fact, the European Investment Bank is one of the banks which has taken big initiative with respect to mobilizing funds, openly declaring green options. And in fact, the climate finance in Europe is in fact far way ahead of the climate finance which is happening in even United States, as we would see in the later slides. And whenever we pick any policy issue, for example, in Europe, there is this much spoken about carbon tax. So the problem of this carbon tax is that if you start discriminating goods which are coming from developing countries under the basis that their carbon intensity is very high, then logically speaking, what happens is that this would again further pull down their options of growth. So there is a study by the UNTAD which tries to show that something like the carbon tax. The implication of this would be that the incomes of the developed countries would go up, and the incomes of the developing countries would actually tend to go down. And so, if it is occurring like that, that is the developed countries' incomes going up and developing countries' incomes going down, and with that we would be able to see to it that the emissions gets reduced. Then it's not a win-all situation. It's a situation where somebody has to pay a heavy price, and that too the developing countries have to pay a very heavy price. It's clear that this green technology, that is, we should be using green technology. This sort of a thing becomes problematic, because sometimes what would happen is that this would actually end up giving the advanced countries a further advantage with respect to different goods and services. So it is in this particular context that it is in this larger context. There is always this issue of this conflict between developed and developing countries. You have seen that to the stock of greenhouse gas emissions, the contributions of the advanced countries who are currently advanced countries have been very huge. But to the flow of greenhouse emissions, say in the year 2018, you have already seen that countries like US, of course, are contributing, but China is also contributing. India is also not far behind; they're also contributing. Might be we can justify ourselves saying that our per capita emissions is not as high as it should have been, but nonetheless, should we try to aspire for higher per capita emissions, or should we in fact think in terms of actually having lower GHG emissions? So when that becomes some sort of a binding consensus, some sort of a consensus worldwide that we should in fact try to have a low carbon economy, the making of a low carbon economy. In the making of a low carbon economy, I think this has been one of the most important instruments which has been put forward. And this instrument is the instrument with the green bonds. In the rest of the lecture, we will fully focus on green bonds. But of course, a little bit on catastrophe bonds also I would mention at the end. But the larger focus of the talk would be on green bonds. Green bonds is nothing but it is bonds which are issued with a specific purpose. We know that companies and corporations issues bonds towards their expansion activities. They basically they tap the markets, and when they tap the markets, usually if you're tapping the markets internationally, you tap it in hard currencies, for example, in dollars or in euros. But domestic markets also you can tap, and you could possibly be tapping in your local currencies also. Nowadays, some of the developing countries have also been able to issue loans in international market or international offshore markets also in their own local currencies. For example, there are Indian companies that have been able to tap and get masala bonds. Their bonds are called masala bonds, bonds which are denominated in rupees. And there are bonds which are issued by Chinese in their renminbi, and that renminbi bonds are basically called dim sum bonds. So there are bonds which are actually issued nowadays in local currencies other than the hard currencies. Other than currencies like dollar, euro, franc, etc., you basically have some of the countries being able to tap and mobilize funds in the international arena. But remember that there is always a problem that the proportion of this particular funds which is being mobilized is extremely less. And many of the countries in the world, many of the developing countries in the world would not be able to mobilize funds unless some multilateral development banks, which is like MDBs, like AIIB or ADB, or say African Development Bank, or say European Investment Bank. There are many of these multilateral development banks, or say the international financial institutions like the World Bank. Unless they are able to partner with these countries, unless sometimes they are ready to uh, take on themselves some part of the risk of the particular issuance, or unless they are ready to subsidize to some extent, some of the countries would never be able to tap the international market. So there are tapping international market is one thing, asymmetries associated with the tapping of the international market towards mobilization of resources is another reality. Particularly with respect to developing countries, it is a very important reality. Whether it be bonds, whether it be tapping bonds, or whether it be tapping borrowings for pure corporate purposes without any sort of green principles, or whether it be with green principles also, tapping the international capital markets towards getting funds between advanced countries and developing countries. The advanced countries definitely are better off, particularly countries like United States or some of the countries in Europe. They basically have an advantage over the developing countries in this particular regard. And with respect to green bonds, the issue is this, that when all of the international financial institutions, financial system has got number of banks, and number of banks are giving number of loans. I'm trying to be as simple as possible because I want to explain to you clearly as to what was this logic, why there was a preference, there was a thing being floated that we should try to encourage issuance of green bonds. That is, when number of banks are basically issuing number of loans worldwide, and if due to climate change, if due to unforeseen rains or droughts or so, the crop loss is occurring and the person is not able to pay the amount back, what is happening is that the bank, which is part of the larger financial system, is now incurring losses. So your asset becomes a bad asset not because of anything else. There is an exogenous risk out there. And what is the exogenous risk? That exogenous risk is the climate risk. And who is contributing to this climate risk? The rise in the GHG emissions, which is creating this tendencies of warming, is essentially contributing to this loss. So that loss, which one bank is confronting here in India, is confronted by one other bank in America, another bank in Africa, another bank in Latin America, worldwide. All the banks which issue loans to different purposes, finds that some part of their loans are not repaid and some part of their loans becomes bad loans because of certain adverse climate events. So adverse climate events having an impact on the portfolio of the banks have to be addressed. So therefore, to the Bank for International Settlements, there is a method called the network of greening of the financial system. They essentially started trying to say that between giving loans for certain purposes which would try to make a better planet or try to make a low carbon planet, and giving loans to certain other projects which would actually be hazardous, to the environment, we should give priority to those projects which would actually be low carbon in nature, which would actually be creating low emissions low emissions. So we should try to prioritize like that. And how do we prioritize? We could even think in terms of a lower interest rate for some such sort of loans, provided the loan is actually utilized for this purpose itself. This is one method. So when it is being done at the micro level by different banks together, the extent of loans which actually would actually be diverted or which would be shifted towards number of such sort of low carbon economy events or economy activities would become higher and higher. And things which were at one time not worth being considered for financing. I'm coming to the details of it in the for the slides ahead. Things which were once considered not worth being financed will now be financed. If there is a possibility of thinking in terms of financing this, that is one good part of the green project. So one main problem, I first let me say the pluses of this green. What is this green bond? What is the plus point of green bond? One, if you're going to mobilize funds for a particular through a green bond route, you are supposed to basically utilize it for that green project itself. You cannot mobilize funds and utilize it for some other purpose. So automatically the green bond projects, the projects which you are basically trying to do using the proceeds of a green bond, should actually be utilized in that one itself. And there should be a proper process which that financial institution or which that underwriter should follow, when it basically says that yeah, this meets the principle, this meets the criteria. So there is this International Capital Markets Association, ICMA or IOSCO related. There is a securities regulating international regulation, international regulatory efforts which has been made to see to it that they only designate a set of activities. They have a long list of activities which they consider to be sustainable, which they consider to be contributing to the making of a low carbon economy. And such sort of activities alone are sanctioned projects, and they have to be vetted. There has to be a second party report on the basis of it, evaluation report on the basis of it. Then only, therefore, the bonds can actually be issued saying that we are going to do it with this purpose. And then there should be a reporting, there should be transparency procedures which are used, and also what have been the benefits as a result of this particular project being undertaken. We have to basically keep a track record of what are the positives which have actually come as a result of the implementation of this project. These are largely called the green bond principles. So therefore, to the most important criticism which many people, many corporations, companies, etc., who have mobilized funds on the basis of green bonds also argue is that it entails a large amount of paperwork. But of course, if the paperwork is done and only the proper things in the paperwork are reported, etc., it would actually add to the public. But now what is happening is this. Now, before before telling us to the this fund has been mobilized under the green bond, and there is a strong preference now because it is said that worldwide different financial institutions are now interested in actually subscribing to the green bonds. So when you are issuing green bonds, the demand for green bonds is far higher. Demand for this particular bond is far higher. Then what happens is that the price of the bond, you are having a large demand for your bond, and therefore the price of the bond goes up, and you will have a lower yield. That is, you will basically ending up, there is a larger demand for the bond, and when you are having a larger demand for the bond, it is possible for you as a person who is going for a green initiative to undertake your project with lower cost. That means this is basically what we call as greenium, which accrues to the green bond. That is, you are basically having some sort of an advantage by virtue of actually going ahead for a green bond, a green project. That is a project which is on the basis of green principle. That's a premium. That's an advantage which you get in the form of a lower cost of financing, because there's a large demand for the demand for projects which are ecologically sustainable. So now you can see in this particular particular chart, you can see the green bond issuance, which has happened from 2014 to 2022, and you can very clearly see that there's a steep increase. It's a sources the climate bonds initiative. There's a steep increase which has happened from 2014 to 2021 with respect to the issuance of global bond, global at the global level, the issuance of green bonds. And you can also see the countries which are issuing it on a large scale. You can see that the countries which have massively contributed to the issuance of green bonds include, say, Europe, and next, of course, is North America. So Europe and North America has been able to, like how I have told you, whether it is the ordinary bond market or say the green bond market, automatically the larger chunk of it is going to be mobilized by the economies which are of larger countries, which are countries which basically boast of hard currencies. And in fact, you would be surprised to know that one of the largest issuances which has been done in United States is by Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac, and they are the companies which are responsible for huge real estate loan. That is, you basically have the mortgage market in United States, wherein people buy houses and then the mortgages are basically repacked and sold, and they are basically big players in that mortgage market, and they are the issuers of one of the largest bonds in North America, particularly in United States. And what do they do? What is their project? Say, what is the project? The project is that they try to engage in the process of enhancing efficiency of buildings. Enhancing efficiency of buildings in the sense that they would try to create methods by means of which the water use loss is reduced. There are systems of water harvesting which are being implemented. There are methods of solar panel sort of energy systems which are being installed. So there are renewable energy practices which are basically being started, which do not rely more on fossil fuels. There are also water conservation strategies which are being done, and so for one flat or one apartment per se, if some amount is involved, for the number of apartments together, the amount which is involved is very high, and therefore too, there is a huge loan which is being mobilized. These are all methods by means of which you are trying to get buildings adapt to the new climate, and indeed to address the climatic challenges also. When such sort of steps are basically being taken, it is said that it will try to improve the green nature of that particular project. So one country, one most important country, you can see, very surprising also in that sense, but not that surprising to people who have read about it. You can find that right from 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, you have a light green of that shade is of Europe. You find that the funds mobilized by Europe with respect to the mobilization of green bonds is very high. And in fact, a European Investment Bank has been one of the earliest issuers, possibly the first green bond issue. Of course, it is said that the World Bank had also done some issuance before, but European Investment Bank is considered to have tapped the market the first ever time towards trying to finance number of projects of different countries under the European Union, with respect to different ecologically sustainable projects which would actually bring ecological sustainability. So in this graph, what I wanted to show is the predominant or overwhelming share of the total funds which are basically being mobilized under green bonds by the North American and European region. In fact, the Asia Pacific region, you can find that in 2021, the Asia Pacific region has witnessed a steep increase, and you will later on see that the steep increase is precisely because of the and we can come to that later. And you can find that the same amount, that is around and one more point which I wanted to say in the previous slide, there is a slide where you have green bond issuance, is that after 2021, in fact, there has been a slack, there has been a reduction in the amount of green bonds which has been issued. And very important to notice that reduction, because this is the year in which you basically had a large steep increase in the federal funds rate, effective rate. So the moment the increase in the federal funds effective rate is happening, remember, the capital markets was running short of opportunities, so they found green bonds to be one important avenue where they could actually put their funds. And now suddenly you find that the capital markets are now they are basically having the federal fund rates being higher. So how much the this so-called big romance for the green bond will continue? Is it sustainable? We will have to see in the coming years. And now you can find that the issuance of green bonds by the type of organization. Most of the organizations, that is the thing which is very important to notice, is that the extent of government, most of the organizations which are basically mobilizing funds are of the non-financial corporation nature, or they are of the financial corporation nature. You can basically find that the red and the blue colors are reflective of these financial and non-financial corporates. So either they are basically mobilizing and giving loans to others, but for financial corporation, for example, if HDFC Bank basically goes for an issue of green bonds, and as a result of that they have mobilized funds, then they are forced to utilize that particular resources only for financing or giving loans for green projects. It is required. It is the principle as enunciated by the ICMA or IOSCO principles, green bond principles. The equivalent of that principles is there in India. In India, the rules relating the adaptation of these rules have been made by the SEBI. SEBI has made adaptation of these rules because these rules had to be followed, and now Reserve Bank is also encouraging this process of the greening of the financial system. But remember that the sovereign bonds which has been mobilized, sovereign issues have been very less. So it has not been much. But you should remember that in the last 2 3 years there has been number of sovereign bond issues, and one of the leading sovereign bond issues was that of United Kingdom in the recent past in 2023. India has also gone for two tranches of sovereign green sovereign issues. That is, there is a bond which is being issued by the government itself. It's like a green gilt. You can say that, like a gilt security, you basically have green gilts being issued. This is also something which is pretty obvious, but nonetheless it need to be told, because again you find that the mobilization of funds, irrespective of whether it is green bond or whether it is the other bonds, the currency of denomination continues to be largely dollar or euro. And dollar and euro, and even if you are an Indian who is mobilizing funds in the international market, you would end up mobilizing funds in dollars or in euros. And remember, the Chinese are also mobilizing bonds in their offshore market. Most of the funds which they are mobilizing in the offshore market, they are also mobilizing in dollars only. But it is also pertinent to note that in the year 2021, the amount which is being mobilized by the Chinese in the green bond market, particularly in local currency CNY. I think this is noted by CNY in this particular chart. It has been witnessed to a very steep increase. Of course, year 2022 has been a little bit down precisely because world interest rates had gone up, and as a result of that, the relatively this relative advantage which people had to market green bonds is no more continuing like before. One will have to wait and watch. particularly given that so much of activity is happening on the climate front, and the COP28, which is supposed to happen in Dubai, it is going to come up with new ideas following the Paris Convention, the Paris Conference, which has happened recently. One will have to wait and see whether that's going to have any sort of an impact on the world of green bonds. And for all what we say, if you take cumulatively, the total green bond issuance has not been very huge over a long period of time, and it is only a trifle in the whole market for the market of bonds otherwise worldwide. So I think mainly we are trying to say that the currency risk associated with the other bond issue is there with the green bonds also. And green bond also gives us returns, and therefore if the return has to come, the projects which are basically being undertaken should also be yielding some returns. It should not be that the green bond is not going to give any. The returns are there, of course, because it's sustainable nature. There's a small lower rate which they get. That's the only difference. Otherwise, green bonds. That is exactly why when we say that when we try to finance through bonds, we should have some receivable incomes which will be keeping the persons who are subscribing to the bond staying put with the scheme. And that is exactly why whoever starts a green project will be forced to go for some user charges, or some such sort of methods by means of which they levy charges, because otherwise it would not be possible to repay. And that is the only way otherwise is for some states or some governments to mobilize funds on the basis of the taxes which they would collect in due course. If somebody is mobilizing bonds for like that, then it is a different story. But under the current picture, nowhere we found that government is a big player in the issuance of sovereign bonds. The first ever sovereign bond issue was done by the European Investment Bank, and ever since there has been an increase from $100 billion in 2015. It had reached $1,000 billion by 2020. That's 10 times increase it has witnessed in the course of just 5 years. Even now, it has not reached 2 trillion, and because ever since there has also been changes in the global economy, particularly with respect to the tightening of monetary policy in the United States, that's also going to have a very big impact. Not that there has not been any sovereign bond issue. First sovereign bond issue has been done by Poland. It has been followed by many other countries like Singapore, Belgium, Nigeria, Ireland, Lithuania, Britain. India had gone for a huge mobilization of funds in this regard in 2023 in March in two tranches, and Chile in 2019. Chile was the first Latin American country to mobilize funds like this. In fact, I had already drawn your attention towards the UK government and the green deals which it had mobilized in the course of 2021 and 2022. In fact, the largest mobilization which has basically happened in Europe. And the next section, I thought I will deal with the two important countries which all of you are eagerly watching in the current world. And these two important countries are India and China. I already told you that there is an upper hand which different North American and European economies have with respect to the issuance of bonds. In our country too, we have a method of streamlining the activities of the issuance of green bonds, and it is basically being done by the Securities and it is SEBI. The SEBI basically undertakes this particular Securities and Exchange Board of India basically undertakes the task of basically bringing in certain principles on the basis of which the green bonds can be issued. And as late as January 2023 as well as February, it is in two tranches. The government of India had basically mobilized funds of 80 billion each. It was for 5 year and 10-year tenors. And you should remember that why I am saying the year tenors is very important, because if you take India's issuance of bonds and the world issuance, there are certain bonds which we have already seen that the British mobilization of bonds, it has been mobilized for a maturity period of 12 years and 32 years. So 32-year maturity bonds they have been able to mobilize. So in the Indian case, the tenor of the particular bond which has been issued is only of 5 and 10 years. And as against this, you should also notice that the issuance of bonds is simultaneously happening in another country, China. We are coming to that, so I will just mention about it there. And the largest green bond issuers in our country include Greenco Group, and there are certain other firms. Or Greenco Group is one important company. There are two other firms also which resorts to the issuance of funds like this. Uh, then you have one of the corporations which has mobilized funds. There is a first ever municipal corporation to mobilize funds under the sustainability project. Urban sustainability issues is Ghaziabad. It is a township close to the national capital. It is part of the national capital region. And again, you had Indore Municipal Corporation, which has mobilized some funds. Some certain huge projects, for example, the Reva Ultra Mega Solar Project, which is known for, is considered to be one of the largest solar farms, I think possibly the largest in Madhya Pradesh. It has actually been started with a large scale direct and indirect support of World Bank and cross financing by International Finance Corporation. And there has also been help with respect to currency, local currency mobilization from their part. And you have a series of guidelines which has been issued by the SEBI, and the SEBI basically clearly says as to what are the specific areas in which you can actually give loans. One is renewable and sustainable energy for wind, solar, bioenergy, other sources of energy, clean technology, climate change adaptation, energy efficiency, including green and efficient buildings. When you're constructing buildings, if you basically are able to prove what are the steps which you have taken, which are nature friendly in nature, conservation of water in nature. So different such sort of activities. Clean transportation, for example, mass transportation is considered to be creating far less emissions compared to the private vehicle transportations. Often I used to think when I read about green bonds as to how why the state road transport corporations together cannot basically be given a big helping hand using the green bonds at the extent of and if you can increase the extent of public use of transport through this mechanism, it will be a very big achievement with respect to reduction of carbon emissions. I understand that in our own city, in the capital city of Kerala, I think in Trivandrum, there is a process by means of which there has been a city circular sort of buses which has been started. I understand that some sort of principles governing it in financing includes also parts of this program of greening the transportation system, and then sustainable waste management, recycling waste to energy, forestry measures, afforestation, etc., biodiversity conservation. So these are all the different projects under which the SEBI has set guidelines, which is trying to adapt the green bond principles for the Indian financial system. And SEBI has basically mentioned about these. And remember that when SEBI is mentioning about these, it does not mean that if they cannot repay, they will have to repay. Either you will have to, as a local government, try to repay using the taxes or other revenues which you are collecting, but invariably, if you basically have the issuance of bonds for sustainable projects, what happens is that you will end up actually hiking up user charges. So whether you should hike up user charges to pay, or whether you should enhance taxes indeed to pay back the bonds issued, there should be a good call on it, because sometimes such sort of projects also result in large scale exclusion of people from the use of the public space. And this Greenco Renew and Continuum, I have already told you, they account for almost 80% of the green bond issuance in our country. And there are also public sector organizations like NTPC, IREDA, NHPC, and others who have also gone for major issuance of bonds. But you should also remember that, see, I have already told you that if you issue a particular bond and use the proceeds of that particular bond for a green project, you are correct to issue it. So to different corporates in our country, for example, Reliance Industries Limited, it has mobilized a $736 million dollar green loan. And what was it utilizing the proceeds for? They were utilizing the proceeds of the same towards purchasing REC Solar Holdings. So technically speaking, REC Solar Holdings is another company which is there, and it is not basically resulting in any reduction in carbon print. But nonetheless, because that particular company is able to reduce its, is able to create some renewable energy space, it is said that you can mobilize funds. It is not violative of the green bond principle. So I'm saying that number of companies, even Adani Green, had mobilized the funds to the tune of $500 million towards sustainable projects. They are otherwise making. There are companies that are making forays into various other areas of activity they have got. So when they wanted to make forays into the sustainable energy front, now the green bond principles permit them to basically mobilize funds like that, and mobilize funds through the issuance of green bonds. But remember that the top, in fact, in the year 2022, when Reliance Industries Limited had gone for a huge billion bond sale, that is around $4 billion, were basically they mobilized. That was not, in fact, a green bond of sorts. But technically, green bond means that the all paperwork associated with green bond has to be followed. The GBPs have to be strictly adhered to, because you are basically getting a favored treatment by the international financial number of organizations are ready to basically buy up your bonds, which results in the price of your bond going up and the yield of yours going down. You are able to mobilize funds because of planetary concerns worldwide. And in fact, there are a number of economists who have been, particularly Ashwath Damodaran and others, who have been very critical about ability of corporations to mobilize funds uh, through green bond financing, even when they do not have any record of having engaged in such sustainable activities. So that is where I also thought that we should really have some brainstorming over this thing. Can't organizations which has got a historic track record in this, even when they were working in the public sector, like for example, there is this agency of non-conventional energy resources and technology, as well as the Kerala Forest Research Institute. They are institutes based in the state of Kerala, and these are organizations which have been working with respect to one alternative non-conventional energy. Even far before the world spoke about solar energy, they were trying to propagate all these sorts of non-conventional energy sources. And Kerala Forest Research Institute is otherwise also known for the expertise which they have with respect to activities of forest conservation and forest rejuvenation. And I have never found any bonds or something being mobilized by some such sort of organizations. In fact, to getting access to technology, having directed plans, in fact, we should have methods. How can it be viable? How can it be repayable? That is, how can we mobilize funds and pay it back? I think there should be certain methods. There should be some brainstorming about the appropriate organizations being able to mobilize funds. Of course, the others are all trying to reduce their carbon print. The other corporations are trying to reduce their carbon print and increase their sustainability quotient by resorting to the issuance of green bonds. Now, what is different from the Chinese green bonds from the Indian green bonds is the scale. Huge mobilization of funds is happening in China with respect to number of projects compared to the sort of mobilization of funds which has happened through green bonds in our country. The extent of mobilization which has been done by China is enormous. $200 billion they have mobilized cumulatively of $200 billion. And there too, you should remember that number of corporations are basically resorting to mobilization of loans towards addressing the issues of energy and buildings. I'm also seeing a positive sign of hope in this, because might be even when they always put resistance in international fora with respect to this intended national contributions, etc., might be they are serious upon it. Because if you take the wind infrastructure, it is said that at least one third of the total wind energy infrastructure in the world is of China's. So one third of the solar and wind capacity which is installed is in China. So there is a huge amount of funds which are basically being mobilized by them. But one thing to notice, according to this Chinese green bond report which I had read, was that the tenure of that's the tenor, that is the bonds which are basically being issued are issued with a limited period of 3 years. That means there's a plus and a minus there. Within 3 years, if you have to repay back, that means you should have actually mobilized real returns. That means there were all some sort of funds, some sort of projects which were on the basis of user cost or something like that. Because unless you have long tenure contracts, you cannot actually create environmental goods. Uh, uh, Mobilize funds for environment. Long tenure contracts mean long tenure bonds. You get a longer period, so you can plan for a long period and undertake the investment. So the Chinese bonds I found compared to the Indian bonds, which are also say little bit larger, and UK bonds which are very far longer. The medium term is the Indian bonds, and the UK bonds are far more larger in their duration. The Chinese bonds are of a very lower period. There are also issues associated with it. And the leading banks in China like ICBC, Industrial Bank, Yuzo Group Holdings, Bank of China, CP Holdings, China Construction Bank, they have all been mobilizing funds, particularly with respect to sustainable energy and buildings. Buildings means the increasing and enhancing the efficiency of buildings. And the Central Bank of China has also been trying to assess the banking system on the basis of what's the proportion of the total assets, green assets, which they have to the total assets, and how has it been changing over a period of time. So, I think I should wind up this particular session by trying to say that green bonds is of course a very good alternative way by means of which we can actually try to think in terms of greening the economy. But in as much as the greening of the economy, in as much as the mobilization of funds through bonds is concerned, entails user cost increases. Might be it would also exclude a larger section of the population from benefiting the series of these services. Or we should be very practical with respect to designing activity. For example, around a forest area which is largely visited, we try to preserve that forest habitat, and we try to get more tourists come to that particular place, and we can sustainable tourism, or in these lines. At the same time, we can actually have the provision of ecosystem, the marketing of this ecosystem services, such sort of things. It would work, but not in all things. In some things, I really feel that the government itself should be the issuer of bonds. And number two is green bonds alone. Would it be able to know? Because particularly given that there is a heavy catastrophe in different small and developing island countries, small island developing states, and different other countries, not just because of environmental crisis, but also because of the debt-induced distress. I really feel that it makes sense in what the Bridgetown Initiative and its proponents are again repeating, that we should get back into action also by getting back into this thing, that the old contribution which was told that 0.7 percentage of the GDP of advanced countries, it should actually be transferred to the developing countries towards meeting the larger social good of the developing countries. I think that would also go a long way towards helping the process of financing the transfer of the technology with respect to different green projects. And of course, we can say that green bonds are fine, but sometimes people would always use this green tag to mobilize funds, and they might not end up using for it. That's exactly what is called greenwashing. There's a large amount of greenwashing also which is happening worldwide, and we should in fact be very cautious about that particular process of greenwashing happening. And unless we try to address this issue of greenwashing, and unless we have a regulatory mechanism in place, this could actually, and that's exactly why regulation at the same time is equally important if you basically want this to be sustainable. Otherwise, it can actually be a place where a lot of abuse of, lot of violation of the GBP principle, because it's very easy to maneuver with a set of rules, manipulate the same, and try to use it to advantage. And different corporations have already shown how much they can do it. And I think I should stop here. Yes,
Thank
Doctor
you, sir.
Adish.
Thank you for that very interesting and in-depth session. I wish you could also throw some light on this concept of catastrophe bonds.
Yeah, I would just speak a little bit about the catastrophe bonds. Though, of course, in the slides it does not come. See, the issue is this, that when countries are confronted with catastrophe, that is unprecedented catastrophe occurs in a country, then there's a huge loss which occurs. And financing of this loss, that is for that particular country, you're basically having all of their infrastructure being lost, and there is a big issue like that way that how are you going to finance it? So now there are a set of investors who are ready to buy these bonds once it is being issued. So World Bank had issued it many times, and the issuance of this catastrophe bonds, given that there are people who are ready, or there are organizations and individuals who are ready to subscribe to it, particularly huge hedge funds, etc., are ready to subscribe to these bonds. Within the course in the course of, for example, let us assume that we are buying a cat bond, and that it's called cat bond, and in the course of the particular period, that is say 5 years, that cat bond has been issued for 5 years, and in the course of the 5 years, in case no major catastrophe occurs, up to that is beyond a particular, small sorts of events will happen, but as described by the prospectus of that bond, if it does not occur, then logically speaking, you continue to get the interest during that time, and also you get the capital back. But in case the catastrophe occurs, then of course your capital is lost that time. And this is utilized by some of these organizations. World Bank had to deal with this issue. In fact, World Bank had to deal with this issue of catastrophe in different countries, and they basically thought this to be a very good method. And sometimes the people who have invested in this catastrophe bonds have even taken World Bank to task. The World Bank, they have been fighting litigations with the World Bank, saying that they have lost a large amount of funds. But you know, it is one bond which is being done. Recent catastrophe bond, one of the bonds which has been issued is by Chile. But remember that when we say that here somebody is bearing the risk is being borne by somebody. But risk is being borne by somebody thinking that might be the catastrophe won't occur, and so we will get a higher return also, and we will also get the fund. But in the eventuality of the catastrophe occurring, they will also be forced to suffer from it. But there should be some I do not know how, but there are convenient subscriptions to the catastrophe bond. That is exactly what we, because it is giving high returns also, they are taking high risk, it is high returns are also received for that, and also the countries, in the eventuality of the catastrophe occurring, they are able to finance the same. That is somehow, and remember that many of these small countries are not issuing catastrophic bonds under their own auspices. They are actually join. That is, they are basically doing it with the support extended by some multilateral development bank, or say banks, or say international banks like the World Bank. They are basically trying to do it in collaboration with them, and the only thing is that they issue it on a country specific basis, and country specific basis, and the specific natural disaster or natural event basis. They are not issuing it on a general purpose way, so that that place itself the catastrophe should occur. So, and that place during that particular period, if it is occurring, then you lose the money if you are an investor. But if it is not occurring, you get the money, because there is no loss for the people who have issued it also, because of course there is no reimbursements, etc., which has to be done. And in the light of the number of series of things, for example, from the Kerala floods to the floods which is now occurring in Pakistan, to number of such sort of environmental disasters, sometimes states themselves are thinking, can't we think in terms of this? They are also themselves thinking in terms of how much the rest of the world might be able to bear it. But if you are of such a level of income, like say you are, say, California, where I think it was in US, in one of the states where it was successfully practiced once, and so if you are such a good state, you have got such incomes, and you can take such a risk, then it is one story. But it should not be expected that they did not issue catastrophe bonds. They should have been. Now tomorrow the question will come reverse. Why you did not issue a catastrophe bond? You did not know that there might. Who knew that there would be floods of such a nature in Kerala, or who knew that such a thing would happen in Pakistan? And that is one third of their people are inundated underwater, is what the untied report says. So the question would actually be reversed at that time. That risk is always there. So otherwise, as a hedge, possibly, and set of countries, it's not issued. It's issued for a particular country, for a particular event, for a particular duration of time. So these three things are very important here. So only if these three things match the comment, that is the contract is very specific, because the people who want to subscribe to it would also not want to take the risk and not get any return. So they are really giving higher interest payments as against the other bonds of the same duration for taking this catastrophe bond. And this is of course being trumpeted as a very important source of financing climate risk. And like how green bonds have also been trumpeted, and I am not saying I'm in favor of green bonds or against green bonds, but I really feel that this is also susceptible to have huge risks. Huge risks of you will sometimes end up avoiding a setup and certain ecosystem services. For example, the presence of a forest per se. How are we going to market it? How are we going to say that we are going to get some returns out of it? Or we should make concerted efforts that people will go and travel to the forest and pay some amount, etc. Some mechanism will have to be devised in case we want to finance viable long-term ecological projects. And I simply do not think that these sorts of green bonds which have been issued, different Chinese firms have been issuing green bonds for 3 years. Within 3 years, they are going to return the funds back. I'm not sure as to what is the modus operandi which they are doing, because usually we think that these are all long-term assets which would require some time, and if in a short time you will have to basically mobilize funds. That means you will have to charge them very high. I hope that that's short. That addresses the question in a very small manner, because already green bonds was a long thing to talk about, so that's why I did not want to focus on this.
That in fact makes the matter very clear. But only
Now,
one thing I had in mind, basically this problem of moral hazard and adverse selection, that acts in a big way, maybe in the case of catastrophe
yeah,
bonds, especially
yeah,
the investors.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I think there are quite a lot of questions from the students, the audience, general audience, and all. And also, I'm sure my co-panelists would also be interested in asking some questions and making some references to you. So, Pramila ma'am,
Can I see these questions somewhere? Is it here
yeah.
somewhere?
That we will display when we take the questions from the students. We will
Yeah.
display it on the screen. The panelists can speak directly to you. Yes, ma'am. Pramila
Ah,
ma'am,
yes,
please.
sir. Yes, sir. Sir, sir, very interesting and informative session. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Krishnakumar, sir. And in the case of catastrophe bonds, I have a doubt, sir. By issuing catastrophe bonds, are companies transferring the risk completely to investors, sir?
The
Or
company is not. Yeah. You see, one party is going to transfer the risk.
yeah,
One person is going to bear the risk. See, the issue
yes,
is that as a subscriber of the cat bond, if supposing I am going to buy the cat bond, which is being
yes, sir.
issued, say, in the eventuality of a earthquake or something happening in Chile, or earthquake happening in Japan. In the eventuality of the earthquake happening in Japan, if today I bought the bond and tomorrow the earthquake has happened, I am not going to get any rupee. But within 3 years, within this 3 years, in that particular province of Japan, the earthquake did not happen, and I have got the bond. All the 3 years, I will be getting the interest, and I will also be getting my capital back. So, which is in fact where the person who is subscribing to the bond will benefit. So, it will not be a situation there where all will be benefit. In the other, so automatically the counter argument which is put forward against catastrophic bonds is also like this, that can't there be certain global taxation agreements? Often, whenever these sort of issues come, people speak in terms of the Tobin tax, and nowadays the carbon tax is also said to be some such sort of thing, which is in fact which might work against the developing countries. Also, it is told that if you are going to put taxes on goods which are more carbon intense, then many of the developing country exports would also get discriminated. But so these sorts of resources, why don't we have mobilization of resources on the basis of the short-term capital flows which is happening worldwide, and why don't we have a kitty through which these sorts of larger bads are being compensated for? But in the market, there is plenitude of funds in the sense that the widening income distribution is resulting in huge sort of hedge funds who do not know where they should be putting the money. So they are ready to underwrite other people's risk, and they are jolly well doing it. And and that is it. But like how all of you would know, there were risk writers, the largest AIG, including such firms, can end up being in a very precarious situation if some such sort of a totally different event occurs.
Madam,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
any further query on that, ma'am?
No, sir.
It's
Thank you,
clear.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Our colleague, Dr. Jalajakumari from ICNO Rail Center, Cochin, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Rajesh sir. Krishnakumar sir, I was keenly listening all the topic because this economic matters and climate change, financing, green bond, etc. are not coming under the discipline of our studies. But as the part of this environmental sustainability course, actually this is an add-on course. I think that much you have explained because all the climate summits from actually about the Paris summit and everything is very clearly explained by Dr. Rajesh in his portion, the environmental sustainability law, etc. But this portion, this green bond and catastrophe bonds, etc., are giving us a light into our mind, and we were thinking about. And simply, I was also thinking that I am also one beneficiary of this green bond. I sometimes I may be wrong. I'm just telling that because for a solar energy installation, Kerala government was giving a subsidy of 40% for the people who are trying to install it on the rooftop. And I think that is also a green bond, isn't it, sir? Under the finance of green bond, it is coming, I think, through the Kerala State Electricity Board and collaboration with ANERT. This is happening and at grassroots level through panchayat institutions. So this has been very big campaign is going on, and in Kerala, such kind of green bond participation from the public is also going on. I think KIFBI is also. I have a doubt. I don't know whether how much it is doing. KIFBI in Kerala government introduced Kerala Infrastructure Investment Board. That is also giving a lot of this type of subsidies and other financial benefits for public to be the part of this sustainable development, attainment of sustainable development goal under this green bonds and catastrophe bonds, etc. Am I correct, sir? I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
I know about the fact that KIFBI had basically launched bonds, but the bonds were not green bonds. But in the course of the presentation, I was also trying to say this specific point that there are a set of corporations in our country whose track record, who are otherwise might be as corporations, they are very good, as companies they are very good, but their track record in the field of environment or sustainable processes has not been very great. In fact, their carbon print has been very huge. They have been contributing to a high carbon economy. So under this GBP principle, there is a problem with the GBP principle. GBP principle is saying that if you are taking funds for a particular green bond on the green bond you're mobilizing, you should spend for that. In as much as that is spent on a green sustainable project, then you are correct. So like that way, these corporations who mobilize funds are right. There is no issue that they were doing many other activities which were contributing to a high carbon economy, but for this purpose they mobilize funds. It is in that particular context, in the presentation itself, I was drawing attention to the fact that why can't our KFRI, that is the in the state of Kerala, you have KFRI as well as this Alert or some such organizations, their track record in the field of sustainability and sustainable work has been huge. And I do not think Kerala has issued a green bond till date, because green bonds have been issued, and surprisingly the green bond has been issued by two of the corporations here, the Indo Municipal Corporation and
Same.
Ghaziabad Municipal. Ghaziabad was the first, and of the states I did not find any mention. I do not know, but if at all the state of Kerala had mobilized, it would have been a big news. It was not. I do not think any state has taken any step in this regard, but now I think the government of India has issued a sovereign green bond. The proceeds of that sovereign green bond should actually be shared, I think, with the different layers of government towards meeting large sustainable processes. For example, in Singapore, it is said the city-state of Singapore, almost like a small country, a small city-state of a country where large-scale use of public transportation is used. And here, even for going to small places, people are using our own private motor vehicle. So, in the city of Trivandrum, this is only news which I have heard from somebody who visited me recently, saying that now all the people in Trivandrum are apparently traveling. A good number of people are traveling in buses, because the buses have been modeled in such a manner that it is some energy in sense, some fund has come towards promotion of public transport. And if you take our own state road transport corporation, might be their losses are severe. But if you try to create a model on the basis of the so much carbon credits which we could achieve in case we are all going to travel by buses, might be in the new world where our saving carbon, our creation of carbon credit having a favorable impact on the world climate, that is on the global average temperatures, and our 1 plus 1.5 degree target, not crossing that. For not crossing that, it's going to help. It would be very uh, it would be a very good thing. And if at all, but everywhere, though of course I would also say that we can go for green bond issues, but we should also know who is going to pay the bill of it. That is very important. For the bonds also, is it on the basis of severe hike in user charges that you are going to make the people pay? Then might be we should not go for it. But there were certain schemes. For example, in Delhi now you have a scheme where you say that the women need not pay for traveling in buses. This has also encouraged men also, full families traveling, because half of the women only need to be paid. So this is also encouraging in some extent the use of public transportation. I'm not saying that it is encouraged in a big way, but it is encouraging in some extent use of public transportation, which is also contributing to the reduction in the carbon print. And you are right, but to the best of my knowledge, I think Kerala has also not issued any green bond. Uh, and the corporations, that is where another thing is, see, for a corporation uh, based in Norway, to buy a corporation based in Norway, one of the companies have issued a bond. So he has issued a bond. The company has issued a. I gave one example. I don't want to name the corporation. There is, the corporation has issued a bond, and what did they issue the bond for? Some $736 million or something, to buy another company which is based in Norway, which is working on sustainable. But that company is already there. How the transfer of ownership is going to result in any reduction in carbon? I do not know. But for the corporation, there is a huge addition of low carbon addition is happening. That is the logic which they.
Okay, anyway, not yet learned much about this thing, and sir is throwing light to us to learn very seriously on this matter. And in that way, I'm very much thankful to you, sir, for giving this. And this will be helpful for our learners also to think very widely and in advance, because you are giving all the information regarding the green bonds initiated in 2023 itself. So very advanced session was this one. And we, as a group of this course, we are again thanking you for giving this revised and advanced thought to our learners of certificate and in environmental
Yeah,
sustainability, sir.
yeah, Dr.
That's
Jalaja,
also thank you.
Dr. Jalaja, 2023 is the sovereign green bond of India.
Yeah,
Our
yeah, yeah.
country has
It was
also
under
issued
referred
bonds before,
regulation.
but incidentally, this is the same year in which our country has
Yes.
gone for a sovereign green bond. But there has been number of green bond issuances which has happened from corporates. But of course, it is not a very old thing. See, from 2007 onwards, maximum we can trace it back worldwide. So, in fact, if at all many of us are not much aware of it, it is also because of the fact that this is a new, it is a new instrument which has come. It is a new instrument which has come in the world. But there are principles, and everybody knows that if you have a good lawyer, people say that whatever are the principles, let the principles be there. The lawyer will interpret the principles to suit your purpose. So like that way, because an option is there. This GBP has got a risk. Always there is a risk. Already very renowned professors of accounting like Professor Ashwath Damodaran has taken exception to number of corporations using the green bond route towards mobilizing funds, saying that this is going too far. And he is not a professor of philosophy; he is a professor of commerce and business, who is saying that you are manipulating a particular you are mani- and it is it is said that you should follow the rule. You should try to see to it that it is within the framework of the rule. Like that way, you implement something, nobody is going to raise an issue. So that risk is always there.
Thank you, sir.
Any further query, ma'am?
No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Our colleague from RC Cochin, Dr. Prasida Unnikrishnan. Ma'am,
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your very enriching lecture. In fact, it was a new topic for us because we have never heard about it before as such. And it was interesting to listen to you, sir. Somewhere in the way you touched upon the low carbon economy, sir. So, can you just elaborate a bit more on that, sir?
It, it is process. See, when we are going to produce goods, every process, every good or every economic process would entail some amount of emissions of gases into the economy. So that is exactly why after 1850, that is after 1750, or after the industrial revolution, we find that the carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere has increased. It has increased. The parts per million has basically reached levels of 400. So carbon dioxide emissions has reached from ordinarily levels of say 300 and below 300 to 400, and it has contributed to the process of warming. And so too have the different other greenhouse gases, and their increase contributed to the process of warming. So we try to say that a low carbon economy, or an economy where such sort of emissions are reduced, such sort of a situation, that is with lower emissions, when we can produce the same good, we say that we are trying to move towards a sustainable economy or a low carbon economy. Or so that would actually enable us to have a sustainable earth. That is, we would at least be able to meet the target of not crossing the global average temperature plus 1.5 is our target. We would not be crossing it. So we go for new processes. But what Dr. Prasita is asking is relevant in the sense that let us try to go for it. So there are two processes, say process A and process B. So either you go for A, which generates large carbon emissions, or you go for B, which does not generate as much. But the point before the developing world is this, that do we have access to this process B? The process B might be a superior technology, might be a technology which will enable us to go for a low carbon situation. But is it possible for us to finance it? Is it possible for us to have access to that technology? Who is going to finance our access to that technology? In that situation, what will happen is this that, and over and above that, certain advanced countries are already saying that those goods with high carbon emissions, we should impose a tax. Okay, the moment you are going to say that also, then what happens is this that there will be a set of advanced country firms who will actually be having access to low carbon emissions technology, and these are called the green technologies, and their goods would get far more acceptability as against the goods which you and me produce in these countries like ours. So there should be proper financing mechanisms. That's exactly why sometimes we should not get carried away by these concepts of green bonds and catastrophe bonds, etc., because somebody is underwriting the risk. And can't that somebody be the collective of governments worldwide? Can't that somebody be a collective of global governments? If somebody is underwriting risk and somebody is able to underwrite transfers of technologies using some global common collective, that is the best option. That best option is never going to come. These are all intermediate options. So my objective of introducing to this thing of green bonds as well as catastrophe bonds, indirectly I was also, I'm not trying to say that I wanted to promote green bonds or catastrophe bonds, but I'm trying to say that it might be good, it might be a feasible thing, but it might also be excluding a lot of. So that's exactly why that Bridgetown sort of initiative which is there from Prime Minister of Barbados, and in fact there's an Indian economist Avinash Persod who basically tries to provide support, technical support for Prime Minister's uh, method. Why they are what are they trying to say? They saw that there are a group of island developing states. They are called SIDS. Always the small island developing states are under the threat that the ocean levels are going to go up, and sometimes their plots will be inundated and their country, the full island also might disappear. Number two is that there is a storm and the whole infrastructure goes off. So somebody has to compensate. There should be a loss fund. That's why during the last Egypt session there was this debate about loss and compensation for such sort. Number three is very important. What Professor Avinash Persad did with this Barbados Prime Minister, as I understand this, he, I think, would have convinced the Prime Minister, saying that these six countries are a very small percentage of the total global economy. But now the issue is that different middle income countries, like say Ghana, like say Egypt, like say Pakistan, like say Sri Lanka, due to reasons related to climate change or otherwise, are confronted with a serious issue of debt crisis. And number two is over and above the debt crisis and their debt servicing problems, they're also facing this problem of rising interest rates because United States Federal Reserve have increased the interest rates. It is impossible for even middle income countries to stand by the intended national contributions, that is, their own countries' determined national contributions, which they have subjected to the UNFCCC. So they can't stand by that. They can't. They're not able to improve upon their targets. That sometimes we might be failing with respect to the achievement of this plus 1.5 degrees. That is not more than 1.5 degrees. Our temperatures should go up compared to what it was in the pre-industrial revolution period. So it does not. If so, what did I think their Bridgetown initiative is trying to blend the interest of SIDS, that is a small island developing states, with the middle income countries, and it created a larger forum for discussion that we should try to liberalize the regime of SDRs, that is a special drawing rights. And number two, we should actually try to address this short-term liquidity problems of different economies without subjecting them to severe problems that they will be able to address their local issues. Because there are certain states, I can't even believe, it said that their external debt servicing comes to almost 56%, 60% of their government tax revenues. You can just go to the entire trade and development site and you can see this first page where they're showing the number of countries whose debt servicing ratios, the percentage of the total taxes which they have to pay up, indeed to pay, or indeed to honor the debt servicing and external debt has been significantly increasing. So might be bonds, green bonds, good. Catastrophe bonds also might be this helping us. It is also helping some risk-loving investors to get opportunities to invest in certain cat bonds and make it rich if the catastrophe does not occur. But that said, we should also be able to collectively underwrite the risks of our planet. There should be a method because we are living in a world where huge widening inequalities are there, and there are a set of people who are doing very well. And the top 1% is doing extremely well. So, in such a world, can't we have a mechanism by means of which we underwrite the collective ecological risks? So, if my title had sounded that, I am this big person who wants to celebrate and sell the idea of green bonds and catastrophe bonds, it is indirectly trying to draw your attention to this and also draw through that to the alternative discourses or alternative presentations which are currently in action in the world. I think people should read also about Bridgetown Initiative, which is what Barbados Prime Minister and Avinash Prasad has been putting forward.
Thank you, sir. You've answered it very well, sir. Thank you.
I think, thank you, Dr. Prasida. I think there is a related question to this from our student also, or the viewer also. So I'll take it right now.
Yeah.
This is from Neetu Vineet. She's asking, based on empirical evidence, is it seen that green bonds contribute to the transition to a low carbon economy?
Based on empirical evidence, is it true that the green bonds contribute to the transition to a low carbon economy? For that, first we will have to be very specific about, see, more than low carbon economy, given that green bonds can be issued only by a company to go for ecologically proper processes. You can say that that company's carbon footprint, for example, that company was 100% carbon that's a very huge thing is there. So they have been able to reduce it. Yeah, in that sense, it is okay. But for example, I had told you the case of one other company buying another company. How is it going to change the carbon emissions of the whole globe? So it will not occur. The land, see, it's like my buying your house or you're buying my house. Okay, the house is the house. Yesterday it was Mr. X's and today it is mine, or yesterday it was mine and today it is the same houses or same companies there. So in certain cases it would have resulted in no change. It is just that there has been an ownership shift. It is just that the company is being facilitated an opportunity. Company is being facilitated an opportunity to build up a green image. So that's the only thing which happens in certain cases. And if we want to know about for example, when we look at this thing of low transition economy, etc., for example, let us assume that for next 4-5 years, a lot of green bonds also gets issued, but otherwise also let us say that's a transition happening. It would be happening, but it did not necessarily be because of the green bonds. There might have been other processes also underway, which would have also helped in this. And if supposing a grand landmark technology transfer arrangement is basically being made and financed, and if there is some arrangement between some groups with green bonds or without green bonds, if it is happening, then logically speaking, there could be a change which happens, and we should not interpret that as a fallout of this. One is not leading to the other.
Yeah.
Hope I think I have answered
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I think you have made it very clear. In fact, this is one of the concerns also. Basically, we do not know what is the real impact of such bonds on the world economy or the environmental scenario even. So that is something that we have to take care of. through some regulation or something of that sort. In fact, there are other questions also. Our friend Jan, who is from the Maritime University, he is asking this question: what happened to the Global Environment Facility?
Yeah, I think
Is it still effective?
again, yeah, I think now we will have to think in terms of a new global environment, because the global environment facility has to be redesigned under the new circumstances. Might be, this is the sort of global commons about which he is speaking. So if you have a financing mechanism through which you can do things in a far more just way, then it becomes better, where you will not be having what I call as a user cost models. If you do not have that sort of a thing, then it is better.
Yeah, that is very true. In fact, there is a related, it's somewhat related to this. I feel Jane is asking further, what is the efficacy of the Paris Agreement? There is a seat
What
of pan decisions of USA. Where are we heading for? What is the efficacy of the Agreement?
what is
Dr.
the
Jain is
efficacy of the Paris Agreement? There is a seat of banned decisions by the USA. What are we heading for? I didn't get the word banned decisions. Yeah.
yeah, I too am a
Many
bit
cases,
confused.
let me just tell. Let's see. The agreement, the Paris Agreement, Paris Agreement also does not have any legal enforceability. For the first time, the world leadership thought that something is just going out of control. Might be our planet is going to be doomed. So let us do something. And every country readily agreed to give some determined contributions. And for the first time, the major conflict which used to be there, that you are not asking the developing countries to pay up at least little bit or go for reduction in carbon emissions. So that was agreed to, and in fact, countries like India are also saying, despite their early stages of development, we should remember that GDP is one thing and per capita GDP is another thing. So when countries like India are also contributing, saying that we are readily going to switch to these sorts of things, irrespective of the little bit of cost which we have to bear, I think, despite that, but Professor, no, the current president Biden has come back to the particular forum, and he's also saying that US will be contributing its bit. So I do not know whether at least in the current juncture, because during President Trump's time, see, there's always, it's very easy to say against President Trump, but he might also be airing the concerns of the industrial middle class, who would have also thought that now on the basis of this they would also have to suffer. So, but given that President Biden seems to be trying to own up responsibility, at least we should give some time, because the processes are on. Let us see their response to what's called this Bridgetown initiative. Could be that is a better way of assessing it.
Exactly. In fact, our friend Mahesh, who is currently based in Geneva, he is
Oh,
also asking a question: would green bonds be viable in the absence of regulatory and fiscal environment in developing countries that actively promote green investments, carbon taxes, feed-in tariffs, or green subsidies?
yeah. Yeah, in fact, would green bonds be viable in the absence of regulatory and fiscal environment? This is the main thing is that under a regulated framework in the developed countries, also this is being manipulated to such an extent that there is always a risk of this being manipulated in our countries. See, I would not say so much that in a regulated environment these things can work, because in as much as you can actually in as much as you can actually tweak the law to suit your purpose. That's how basically companies are effectively using green bond proceeds towards buying up firms and buying up firms, and thus claiming that they are trying to reduce the carbon footprint, which actually is not okay. So I think that is required. But given that these instruments see, main risk far more than what Mahesh is trying to argue. I think more important is the risk associated with many of these developing countries being forced to borrow. Say, if you have say a green project to be done, and the green project basically requires some amount of import of technology, it makes particularly good sense if they're mobilizing the funds for the same, say in terms of dollars or say euros. So you are now taking dollar loans or euro loans indeed to see to it that you undertake a sustainable project within the country which is not going to yield you any exports or through which you can make a payment back. It is just within the country that you're basically going to undertake this project. If you're going to undertake the project within the country and it so happens that in the same global economy your currency is going to depreciate, and the interest rates, if it is and if the currency is going to depreciate, all other things remaining the same, the amount which you will have to pay back in the original current local currency terms becomes very huge, that it might not be possible that such sort of exchange rate risks, if at least for some of these green bond projects, exchange rate risks can be addressed by liberal subscription to the local currency bonds, it would be good, but nobody would actually want to take up that risk. That is what I would say. So, fiscal and regulatory environment apart, I think even if the fiscal and regulatory environment is there, there's an overarching exogenous risk of possible depreciation of currencies which can occur to developing countries, given that the developing countries cannot borrow in the international markets in their own currencies, what Barry Icahn Green and others say as the original sin. So, if you have such an environment, then with with the highly regulated and a good fiscal environment too, also it can create problems. But if there is, and it depends also on what we define as a fiscal environment. For example, if it is that we want to have a fiscal environment which is very liberal towards charging, user cost, etc., towards repaying these things, somebody would be somebody would have to pay. So that would also be an issue, I think. I hope that.
Yeah, exactly. There is another question from Siji Ratish. If a firm or individual plans to invest in catastrophe bonds, please explain the key characteristics they should assess before making this decision.
No, it is actually a high risk, high return sort of an investment which is being done. I do not know whether individuals are investing in it. I really think that major investors in this, as I understand, are all just hedge funds and risk funds which are based largely in US. And they are basically investing in these sorts of catastrophe bonds. And the issuer of these bonds are some of these international organizations like the World Bank. And I think it says, and the assessment is very clear. See, if there is a high propensity of a risk of the occurrence of an earthquake only, it would make sense in issuing a bond relating to the occurrence of an earthquake during a particular period in that place. And if yet you are ready to take, you are just making a speculative guess that possibility is there or not. So it is like a gamble, but it is done largely by your these hedge funds. Individual investments, I think there's some high net worth individual, but they also usually invest in these things through the hedge funds, through the hedge funds. Chile is the country which has recently issued a catastrophe bond. I hope City Ratish does not go and subscribe to any of these catastrophe bonds. It's highly risky, directly or indirectly.
Okay, then I think we can take the next question. The next question is from Mithun Raj. He's asking, what are the potential challenges in investing in catastrophe and green bonds under uncertainties?
Yeah. See, there is a large demand for the investment in green bonds because many of the including the central banks worldwide has been encouraging investment in green bonds. So that is one reason why the green bond investment, when you basically buy or subscribe to the green bond, the issuers of green bond are able to get their financing being done at lower interest rates compared to the other similar non-green bonds. So that is one advantage, because what is the whole point? The whole point is that we are able to collectively reduce the carbon print. In fact, when I'm talking and when I'm answering some of the questions, so I really think that if it is for acquiring another firm, should we allow green bonds? I think we should not allow, because green bonds are meant to reduce the carbon print, but technically we allow. We say that the company in itself, in its prospectus, is saying that we are going to buy up one firm, and it is allowed. They have already sanctioned it. And this challenge is there, Midun Raj, if you have understood me right. If you buy assume that you're a very rich person who has invested in a hedge fund, and that particular hedge fund has invested in a catastrophe bond. Okay, the catastrophe bond has been bought, and a crisis has occurred in that particular country, the crisis that the earthquake has occurred, you lose all your money. Okay, you are a cool man. Okay, you lost a $1 million, you don't care. Fine, then it's for you. And assume that the catastrophe didn't occur, and on the $1 million you have invested, you're also going to get interest and higher interest than the other interest for the same tenor for 3 years or 5 years or whatever, and you're getting the capital back. Not a bad deal for you, but you should be ready for both.
Yeah, I think that's the important point. There is another question from Adira. She is asking, how can catastrophe bonds hedge against catastrophic events and enhance fund risk adjusted returns?
Now, that is exactly the game which they are playing, in the sense that, see, for example, if some of the funds are going to subscribe to number of catastrophe bonds, and only one of the place the catastrophe is occurring, they are also diversifying catastrophes. So, for example, there are five catastrophe bonds which a particular fund has bought, and one catastrophe. There's a case that not even one catastrophe occurs, then you are getting a big thing. If five catastrophes, only one of the catastrophe has occurred, then four catastrophes have not occurred. So automatically the weighted average and the return would be very high. So you lose on one, but you gain on the other, and the interest and all the things together might be, you will be able to more than get a return. And if all the five know where the catastrophe is going to occur, then you're going to get a big return. Chances of simultaneous occurring of catastrophes in different regions would be possibly less, let us assume. Then that is the thing which is happening now worldwide. All of us are facing this 1.5 degree problem. We are having a common risk. So if some such sort of thing happens everywhere, whatever the catastrophe bonds you have bought, I mean, all those events, then of course the returns will go down. I hope that answers Atira's question. I'm not, and all my answers are not fully perfect or anything like that. Many of these
Yeah.
answers are also thought. I'm just thinking about an answer and speaking over it. If I'm wrong, I can be corrected.
No, but you are making things very clear. In fact, Jan has a rejoinder. Still, the whole issue resolves around the sticking points of adaptation and mitigation. Isn't it so?
Yeah, revolves around the sticking points of adaptation and mitigation. Yeah. See, the whole thing is, how are we going to adapt to the changing world, and how are we going to get the world to where it was? Because some amount of reduction is what we all want. And if we are wanting some amount of reduction, and if we are basically striving for that, then it is what? That is something which is called the ownership of the citizen. Citizen not of a country, the citizen of the whole world. We all are owning of some issue, and exercising things associated with it's a different story. But huge scale adaptation, uh, and is this adaptation and mitigation? Some place I had even read something like this, saying that all these readaptations do might be, it would also result in a new issue. Who knows? Who knows? There might be some other issue which comes up.
Yeah.
Because I have even heard that there are certain technologies, if it is developed, one technology about which it is told is that the carbon dioxide sucking, that is taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Uh, this sort of technology, if it is basically being developed or it is developing, then these issues might have a technological solution also.
Yeah.
Because first time, remember that, and if somebody is uncomfortable, and because number of students are there, let me also say that if you are very uncomfortable with hearing about greenhouse gases, please don't be uncomfortable about it. I was also uncomfortable about it a year or two back. There is this NASA Kids. One section is there on NASA Kids. In NASA Kids, they give very beautiful picturizations of all things related to global warming, about all greenhouse gases, about where all they occur, what all are the processes, everything. So, learning every day new things we can keep learning. But technically, this issue around climate change forces us to pick up a little bit of geography and geology and economics and science, proper science, we need to make sense of. And we might be totally wrong, because another scientist would come with a new thing, then we might be right from the knowledge as we have now. Might be something else comes out.
Yeah, I think that is a very elaborate answer. There is another question. This is from Nandita. In higher ed zones, how can catastrophe bonds help transferring risk to investors?
This is the same question again coming in different forms. Uh, what would I answer for this? For example, the risk is very high and you are issuing a catastrophe bond. Automatically, the interest payments or the returns which you will have to give to the catastrophe bond investor would be high. And remember that if it is a very high risky area in some developing world, etc., it is basically going to be collectively done by some international financial organization, etc. They actually partner with these. There are multilateral development banks and others who would partner with these country governments or country organizations towards floating this, and they will also be sharing the risks also. So if you have a high risks, then automatically there will have to be assured some higher return. And of course, if the catastrophe does not occur, the investor will get huge gains. And if the catastrophe occurs, then he loses it because he has invested. But at that time, financing becomes easy for that particular region which was witness to catastrophe.
Yeah. Basically, the market conditions at a particular point in time matter a lot for
It
the
also
success
matters a
story.
lot because the interest rate changes ever since. That also matters. That is a very important point in the
Right.
sense that is supposing overall interest rate goes up, any bond, the basic principles of bond is that bond prices are inversely related to interest rate. So, catastrophe bond or non-catastrophe bond, if there is a particular rate and under which you have mobilized funds and the bond is listed, and if the interest rate is going up, automatically the price of the bond will go up.
Yeah.
So yeah, in the last year also you should remember that 400 basis point increase in interest rates has never occurred before. And from 0.25 percentage or so, the interest rate goes up to 440, 4.45 percentage or something like that. So such sort of an increase in interest rates had even put all the financial institute, US banks in a serious disarray because who will think that a treasury security would decline in that? You want funds, you are trying to pay funds to the customers, you are selling the treasury securities, treasury security value has collapsed because that's an important as a safe asset which you had diluted in value. So logically, uh, that is also a catastrophe because you're having a treasury security going
Very
down
true.
in
Very
value.
true.
Yeah,
In
so
fact, I think
interest rate is a very important determinant, and I think if people would not, I think you should just remember that the price of a bond and interest rate is inversely related.
yeah,
If
that,
interest rate in the economy goes up, and for the interest rate in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh to go up, we need to hike it up. When the US interest rate is increased, as a margin of that, our interest rate will increase. And our interest rate will increase there, here, everywhere. It will increase in the remote village at the southernmost tip of Kerala also. So
That's
US
yeah.
monetary policy and the interest rate is simply very important in transmitting the global financial cycle. It will transmit the global financial cycle and make the houses in Trivandrum cheap or expensive. It will make the tourist villas in Munnar expensive or cheaper. It would make business activity, access to loans for business activity in the city of Calicut cheaper or expensive.
Uh, I think we have had more than a 2 hour session. So maybe one last clarification from my point of view, I would like to have from you. That is, there is this effort of de-dollarization that is taking place at various corners of the world, including in certain monetary zones. So, do you think this will ultimately result in a kind of delinkage of the world markets, especially the bond market and so on, from the policies of the Federal Reserve?
This is a no. Let me answer this question in two parts. Uh, where is this de-dollarization which has happened?
No,
Because that's
the
in
effort
itself a
is
very
there.
good question. For example, I will tell you that there is a de-dollarization which has happened, say, between India and Russia and India, and so they will trade in their own currencies, etc. Okay, some amount of trade is happening like that. But if you go by 2022 is the last triennial survey of foreign exchange, which has happened. And 2022, by the time this Ukraine Russia imbroglio is there, okay, and 2022, I'm saying 2022 May, when the survey was conducted, it was in some March and all these sorts of early part of 22 to the time when the crisis is there. At that time, the survey is conducted and the results were published by the BIS in 2022 December or so. And in the triennial survey of foreign exchange, it says that in 88% of the foreign exchange trades, one side is the dollar, one side continues to be the dollar. So if you have a daily transactions in the foreign exchange market, 88% means, of course, everything together will add up to 200%. And the next important currency in the hierarchy of currencies is euro, which is far lower. So logically speaking, of course, as a working arrangement, when dollar is not available and in that particular circumstance, exchange of goods for goods is happening. Okay, it can happen. It will happen. But is it affecting? And there is also too a disconnect between the world in which you determine the exchange rate and the world GDP. If you take the share of the total GDP and the share of United States in it, it is just 25%. The United States is just 25% of the world GDP. But the dollar, its currency, plays a very significant role, number one, in being part of one side of all foreign exchange transactions happening. Number two, as the currency of denomination of number of international debt securities worldwide, the single most important currency, 59% at least of the foreign exchange reserves of all the central banks of the world. And most importantly, for the benefit of one and all, let me just tell in plain prose once again. There is a transaction of an American citizen giving a loan to another American citizen in dollar. That is one transaction. And there is another transaction called a non-American citizen giving a loan to another non-American citizen. This non-American citizens giving loan to non-American citizen, that's a huge market of around $13 trillion. This is basically called US dollar credit outside the United States. And this $13 trillion is nothing but it's something like US GDP is say some 22 trillion or something like that. So 13 trillion, so much. So such a huge amount of dollar related activities are happening worldwide, and it is not that I'm trying to make a case for the dollar. I'm trying to make a case of being far more realistic that de-dollarization can happen between two individuals that like Dr. Rajesh and me can decide, no, today onwards we will not transact in dollars, we will transact in rupees. because I am and two countries they are deciding, okay, we will only transact for a few days. We can show our animosity to dollar, but does it matter? It's on and particularly there's no if the next currency was somewhere nearer in the hierarchy to the dollar, because euro came as a big challenger. You would remember in 2000 and all, euro, we all used to be looking at euro. It's now going to, there's going to be and the challenger, I think the single most important credible challenge came when the President Saddam Hussein has told that Iraq will be selling oil in euros. This was a big challenge which he was posing to, because most of the commodities worldwide are denominated in dollars, and he was making a statement that he is going to denominate and sell oil in euros. So I do not think even that sort of a challenge is what anyone now is raising. So I do not know whether that viable de-dollarization and de-linking. I think U.S. global financial cycle is there to stay, and that global financial cycle means a transmission of whatever is happening in U.S. monetary system. The interest rate decisions are going to get transmitted worldwide. It cannot be resisted. It cannot be resisted. Forget about the Western Ghats in Kerala, even by the Great Wall of China.
Thank you. That was very, very elaborate, and in fact, it clarified any little doubt that I had in my mind as well. So I think we have had a very long session, and before closing, I would like to show some of the appreciation that our listeners have had about this session. So Mahesh is saying that thank you for that very detailed response, Krishnakumar. Then Dr. Jain is saying, thanks, Dr. Krishnakumar. The presentation was so instructive. You know the different nuances of green bonds, and there are several other commendations which are coming online. So I'm sure the students as well as the other listeners have gained a great deal from this session. So, any final parting thoughts, my co-panelists? Any one of you would like to make any parting comment on
Nothing,
today's?
sir.
Nothing, sir.
Nothing, sir. The whole discussions held. We were adding the additional points, and it was very much helpful and beneficial for us. That's right. Thank you very much, sir, once again.
Uh, Anyone else?
Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
Please.
you, Krishnakumar, sir. Very useful session, and thank you for the presentation. Thank you, sir.
So, as a formality, in fact, I need not specifically thank Krishnamar sir, because he's like my elder brother, and we have a lot going between us. So, just for the sake of formality, for concluding the session, I would like to state that this was one of the most elaborate and most well-structured sessions that we have had in recent times. The depth to which these concepts of catastrophe bonds and green bonds were dealt with was quite instructive. And definitely, from a course point of view, it has helped us a great deal. Because this is a value addition to our course, and surely this will be part of the course structure also in this session as well as in the coming sessions as well. And we will definitely have a few more sessions from Krishnamur sir, because I'm sure he will not deny us the opportunity for academic interaction ever, knowing the way he has dealt with all these activities from the time I knew him from JNU days onwards. So thank you, sir. Thank you for this very interesting session. It was wonderful to have you with us. And as I said just a little before, we are not going to leave you just like that. We are going to have several other sessions from you from time to time. And it will definitely be of great benefit to IGNOU students and also for SWAYAM students as well. I also wish to thank my colleague Dr. Pramila O, Assistant Regional Director, who has been with us for all kinds of activities associated not only with this course but also for the general functioning of Economic Regional Center Vadagara. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for joining this session. I also thank Dr. Jalcha Kumari, Assistant Regional Director, Regional Center Cochin. In fact, Madam has been part of the course team. Like Dr. Pramila, Madam's discipline is education. So from time to time, we have been getting a lot of inputs with regard to the educational component of this course from Dr. Kumari. Madam, thank you for joining this session. Dr. Prasida Unnikrishnan, who is another of our colleague from Regional Center Cochin. She also was part of the course team and has contributed the session related to the societal aspects. In fact, her discipline is social work. So we have benefited a great deal from her inputs. And thank you, Dr. Prasida, for joining this session. In fact, our colleague, Dr. Sindhu Pinar, had to drop out due to some technical issue. I thank her also for joining this session. And last but not the least, I would like to thank all the students and also other listeners who have joined in this program, especially Dr. Mahesh and Dr. Jayan, who have taken time out of their very busy schedule to join this session and to enlighten us on various other aspects through their comments. So thank you, each and every one of us, every one of you, for making this program a grand success. And I'm sure this will just be the beginning of many good sessions from Dr. Krishnakumar in the coming times. So thank you, sir. Thank you for giving us your time. In fact, the time was not too short. It was literally 2 hours, literally 2.5 hours. And out of your busy schedule, it has been wonderful that you have taken such a vast period of time out and enlighten each one of us on this very important issue area. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity to interact with your students as well as my dear colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
Thank you
we'll
so
now
much.
close the session.